Stealthing is the act of transitioning, then not telling people you're trans. In other words, being stealth, like a ninja. This video is going to talk about what stealthing is and why I no longer do it. So why do people stealth instead of being out and proud? Well, there's a simple reason for that. Safety, right? The world's a big place and different countries have different levels of safety for people who are transgender. This video is not dismissing that at all. It's aware of that. Just bear in mind this video is made by someone who lives in Australia, a country that's actually really good for trans people in my opinion. One of the best, I would argue. Now, stealth can be a bit of a spectrum. There's full-on stealth where you don't tell a single soul that you have in fact transitioned. There's partial stealth where you might tell someone here and there, maybe a friend you trust, that kind of thing. And then lastly, out and proud, which is like as visible as you possibly can be. Now, bear in mind, not everyone has a choice of how much they stealth, right? So I also don't want that video to dismiss that. However, this video's focus is on people who elect to stealth. You might be thinking, couldn't I stealth? Well, the thing is, I did. I tried to. As you can see from this YouTube channel, I ultimately chose not to. The option was there for me. That's a massive privilege, and I don't want to downplay that. I had a go at stealth. I figured I might not get a chance to do it otherwise, so I might as well try it and see if I like it. And this video is more or less to say, I didn't. Unfortunately, stealth didn't make me happy. So let's start with why did I end up stealthing for a brief moment of time? Well, truth be told, I think it came from like deeply rooted dysphoria, as I thought if I seemed like a cis girl, I would become more girl. If I was perceived as a cis woman, I would be more woman. That was the thought process. However, that's not really the case. And to be honest with you, trying to blend in as a cis woman kind of made me more dysphoric than I was beforehand. And more dysphoric than I am now, when I'm not stealthing. Hardcore stealthing can make things very logistically complicated in every facet of your life. For one, drawing attention to yourself makes stealthing a lot harder. As a result, you might feel encouraged or incentivized to conform, right? However, I found myself deeply changing my wardrobe to suit what was expected of me.
And there's some irony in trying to be peak masculinity.
To going to peak femininity. Cis people dress very varied, obviously, because we have lives outside of our gender, right? However, you end up gender stereotyping really heavily when you try to stealth because you're trying to emulate the cis people around you. I found myself altering my clothes. I found myself altering the way I talked about my hobbies. I found myself downplaying hobbies that weren't as stereotypical to the gender I was living as. I would hesitate to mention playing video games and that kind of thing. I found myself talking about games as if I was like a big casual gamer TM, which maybe came from some deeply rooted stereotypes. I really like the game Just Dance, for example, and it is one of my favorite games, sure. But when I got asked, oh, what games do you play? It would always be the one I said first because it probably sounded the most like normal. Not very helpful. Another weird thing about stealthing is I found myself having to lie about really specific things just to maintain the stealth. I was once telling a story about how I had a private room to myself in a Japanese dorm room when I stayed in Japan. The reason that happened was because I told them I was transgender and I couldn't share a room with a guy. So when I told that story, I forgot. And they're like, oh, how'd you get a room to yourself? I didn't know you could do that. When people talked about the school formal, I couldn't mention that I was really upset because I couldn't wear a dress, as they would be like, why weren't you able to wear a dress? So yeah, my version of how the formal went became a consistent lie. A lie that persisted. A lie that keeps adding and adding and adding. I found that if I was hiding every single thing about my life, who was I? What was the truth anymore? Just like Nietzsche from Camp Rock, you can't maintain lies forever. Eventually slip up, eventually get caught out. And this anxiety really, really goes into your heart, lovely audience. The thing is, even if you do successfully stealth perfectly and get a group of friends that don't know you were ever transgender, yeah, I have some news. Picture this scenario. You're talking with them over some nice food, but then one of them goes, you heard about those transgenders? And then everyone collectively goes and says mean things. What did stealthing achieve? Unfortunately, what this can lead to is you can very easily, without realizing it, end up with a group with very hateful people because it wouldn't come up because they don't know you're trans, right? Now, it's super interesting being able to hear what people say when they don't know a trans person's listening. I've gotten to hear some crazy stuff. However, unfortunately, it made me kind of go, what was the point? As it turns out, seeming like a cis woman didn't cure my dysphoria, so that's 1 point down. And the friends I did end up making ended up being transphobes. So that isn't good. Is maintaining the secret that important? That's the question you have to ask yourself when stealthing if you choose to do so. Because for me, it didn't. It didn't feel like I was living as a girl anymore. It felt like I was surviving as one. And that isn't fun. So nowadays, instead of being stealth, I am somewhere in the middle. I don't really mention being trans unless I know someone for a little bit, right? I just find this works better for me. So if someone mentions something trans related, I might bring up, oh yeah, I'm trans, I know that thing. That sort of thing, right? It's not a heavily guarded secret, but I don't leave it out in the open either. So instead of living like Michi at the start of Camp Rock, I was instead saying to myself, this is me. Interesting quirk of being openly transgender. It's easy to find friends who are also transgender. I had scenarios where I met other trans people and they seemed a bit visibly nervous around me.
So I swapped to this voice when I was doing a joke and suddenly they were way more confident.
It became my go-to party trick and I do it really frequently actually. And that's made me feel more proud of myself and that confidence has allowed me to have more friends. When I was stealthing, I debatably didn't have any. To make this point as clear as possible, you are not more of your gender if you appear like the cis of that gender. That's terrible wording. How valid you are as a trans person is not defined by how hard it is for someone to know you're a trans person. It's kind of meaningless, right? If you aren't expressing yourself and being you, then what's the point, right? Now, you don't have to tell every single person you meet. You don't have to tell your mailman that you happen to be transgender. That's fine, that's fine. However, just do what you want to do. Feel what's comfortable for you in the circumstance you're in. Look, I've had a little look at some subreddits of people who are stealth, and I won't lie to you, a lot of them seem kind of miserable. So yes, while passing is a privilege, if we make the world a better place, passing will one day become meaningless. You gotta make sure there's a part of you that exists outside of the fact you're trans, but also you can't lock that up in a box for no one to ever hear about. After escaping the confines of masculinity, I didn't want to wrap myself in the confines of femininity. I'm just gonna do what I want. And that lovely audience was my video about stealthing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see weekly transgender-based content, feel free to hit the funny subscribe button, hit the funny bell icon, that kind of thing. Leave a comment what you think. We post every single week, so if that interests you, then I hope to see you in the next one. Stay hydrated and know that you are valid. I'll see you next week.